When I begin thinking about creating a drawing or a painting from something organic like garlic, obviously I could do it from the entire garlic head like this, but I actually like to break it up so that the parts start to talk to each other. And I like to arrange it and rearrange it and kind of ask myself, maybe, what are the spaces like in between? Are the parts starting to sort of speak to each other in a certain way? And then one of the really key things that I consider is the lighting. So right now the lighting's very flat. There's no direct light. What I'm often working with is trying to establish one consistent direct light source. So when I'm creating it and when I'm ultimately going to work with, let's say, a tonal version of it where the darks and the lights become really important, I often illuminate it very dramatically like this. And I have right now just a simple desk lamp shining across the forms, and you can see how suddenly it just makes it so much more sculptural. The facets that are happening, in here, the top plane here is highly illuminated, the down plane here is in shadow. That down plane, if you squint your eyes, almost blends in with the garlic cloves cast shadow. And then what's happening all around it is the illumination of the table. So this single light source is a really, really important aspect of setting up any kind of object-based situation that you're going to draw or paint from. And also asking yourself, if you have an object like a head of garlic or a clementine or an orange, is it more interesting to do the piece in its entirety or to break it up? I think breaking it up into sections starts to become much more interesting. So the next step after creating a composition like this would potentially be, and I'm going to move this to the side, and I'm going to bring in a version of it that is actually a photo of that same setup. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about composition and how I start to think about what to include and what to exclude. So this composition, I've already decided from the setup, is something I enjoy, but what I want to ask myself is, are the negative spaces, so the negative spaces are the spaces in between the objects, and also I want to ask myself, what is the boundary I'd like to create around the composition? So I'm going to go ahead and start to create actually a smaller boundary around the composition. And obviously, normally I'd be working from the still life itself, but for the sake of the video, I want to use a flat surface to show you some of my thoughts. So what I'm doing here is I'm just bringing in the boundary just a little bit, making a slightly tighter container for the composition. And what that starts to do is it starts to allow me to create more tension between, let's say, the outer edge of this garlic clove and the corner. There's a little bit more tension in there. And what I also often do is I'll create a negative space study before I create my drawing or painting, just to sort of understand what my plan is. And so I'm going to do that here. I'm just for now going to outline the exterior, the perimeter of the garlic cloves, just so I know where the solid shapes are. And you can do this with your drawing, your observed drawing. If you want, you can obviously print out a photograph and do an overlay like this. But the next step, and I'm not going to really pay much attention right now to the cast shadows. The next step is just going to be, I'm going to color in the air. I'm going to color in the air that exists between the forms until it sort of swallows the exterior edge, the exterior line. And as I do that, I'm coming right up to the edge of the composition. And as these areas fill in, what I'm asking myself is, are these exterior shapes, are these negative shapes, which are, the positive shapes here would be the garlic cloves themselves, are these negative shapes interesting? Are they exciting? Because, if I compose this tiny in the middle of my page, then it may not have the kind of resonance or interest that it would be if I really consider how much space I want to leave around the objects, between the objects and the edge of the picture. So when we're talking about composition and we're really trying to ask ourselves, where we want to put the objects in our composition, and again, the composition is the arrangement of objects in space, I'm constantly evaluating, do I want to compose this in a square, in a rectangle, in a vertical rectangle? What are the boundaries, how wide, how tall? And then ultimately, in doing a negative space study like this, you can start to ask yourself if the negative shapes are actually interesting or not. So as I start to kind of fill in the rest of it, I think you get the idea that now I'm sort of understanding that, yeah, I like these open spaces. I like the distance between the objects. I'm enjoying the tension that the objects make between themselves and the edge of the composition. So I'm feeling pretty good about this as a first start. So lighting, composition, and ultimately realizing what your negative shapes are will really ensure that you're off to a great start.